Assassin's Creed 3 has always had a really interesting position among the series. I think it's safe to say that when the game came out, many people considered it the worst of the franchise. I mean, granted, its competition was AC1 and the Ezio trilogy, but the game certainly wasn't as well received as the previous games. It's kind of funny, I think people appreciate a lot of these initially hated games more over time, and Assassin's Creed 3 is one of those weird games where people started to like it more the older it got. It's kind of the same deal with other AC games like Rogue and Unity that weren't too well received at launch. But usually whenever I see people rank Assassin's Creed games, AC3 is almost always somewhere near the bottom of the list. Now, I understand why so many people don't like the game. I'm definitely not saying it's among the best of the series or anything, but I don't know. I've always had a certain fondness for this game. It feels unique in its own way, and there's just something about it that can't help but make me feel like it's an extremely underrated game. The most underrated in the series even. When Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered came out a few years back, it really allowed myself and many other people to replay and reevaluate our opinions on AC3. I think many people realize that the game, while certainly still has its flaws, isn't nearly as bad as most people made it out to be. So I decided to go back and replay Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered again and give it a fair shot and see how the game holds up. Of all the topics on Assassin's Creed 3, the story is probably the most controversial. Some people hate it, some people love it, some don't really care for it, and some think it has its moments. However, the most tedious and infuriating part about this story is it has a ridiculously long introduction and setup, and I'm talking long. This game by far takes the longest to set up its protagonist and finally get into the main part of the story. The first couple hours you start the game playing as Haytham Kenway, Connor's father, as you assassinate this guy in a theater. Really awesome introduction to the game, by the way. Then make your way to America to establish a Templar base of operations and search for an Izu precursor site. Now, despite me just complaining about how long the introduction sequences are, I actually really like being able to play as Haytham at the beginning. It was the first time we ever got to play as a Templar and see things from their perspective. It was really refreshing, and it's funny because the game leads you to believe that you're actually playing as an assassin, which gives you the illusion that you are the good guys. But then when Haytham and friends all say, "May the Father of Understanding guides us," it's almost like a huge twist right off the bat. Granted, I already knew that Haytham was a Templar, obviously, since I've played the game before, but it's a clever way to divert expectations. Since you played as Haytham for so long, you start to believe in him and his cause, and to discover that he's actually the villain or antagonist of the story was a really neat storytelling element. Again though, with that said, it's just too long. You spend a little too much time with Haytham in my opinion, and then you have to play as little Connor as he plays hide and go seek, then as teenage Connor as he climbs through trees, then you have to play as young adult Connor who leaves the village to train and become an assassin, then you have to play some more with Connor as he completes his training, and then finally you get to play as an assassin with a hood and hidden blade. All of this was setup and backstory, and while it was good, it was just too long and really boring sometimes. I just wanted to get my assassin robes on and stab people already, but the game will continually hold you back from all that fun stuff at the beginning. It's literal hours of playtime before you're even unleashed in the open world as Connor, and that's ridiculous to me. The Haytham stuff I was mostly fine with, but most of everything you do with Connor until he finally becomes an assassin is really boring. It's just tons of exposition, and occasionally you'll get to fight a couple times here and there, but it's not until you're finally given the freedom to do what you want in the world and Connor becomes an assassin that the game actually becomes fun. One benefit to going through all those sequences at the beginning with Haytham though is that you really get to learn about his character and his partners like Charles Lee, Thomas Hickey, William Johnson, and Benjamin Church. They all look like good people to you when you're playing from Haytham's point of view, but then when you see these characters again but from Connor's perspective, they look like villains and you see them in a whole different light. Here I thought Charles Lee was a loyal and kind man, and then you see the immediate difference in character when he meets Connor.
It seems. No. You cling desperately to your ways, too ignorant to know your folly. But I am not unkind. And so I spare you, that you may carry word to your people. Let them know the sooner we are given what we seek, the sooner you can return to your pathetic, empty lives. A fair trade, is it not?
It's such an odd but also really cool contrast. You get to see these villains from both point of views, and on the one hand, you think they may actually be good people and trying to help the world, and on the other, they look like psychotic villains obsessed with control and power. And what I love about AC3's story is it was really the first Assassin's Creed game to not be so black and white. In the games prior, the assassins were the heroes, the good guys, the Templars were the villains. This was fact. There was no deeper layer. AC3 makes you realize that maybe there is no hero or villain to this conflict. There's no black and white, only gray, and who's in the right is whoever you choose to believe in. And I must say, the Templars in this time period in general, first with Rogue and AC3, sort of make more sense and seem more reasonable than the assassins of this time period. And I think this assassins versus Templars conflict has never been better represented than through the relationship between Connor and Haytham. Here are two men who think so similarly and believe and want the same things, yet go in two completely different ways to achieve them. I've never questioned the intentions of the Assassin's Creed until this game, until I heard Haytham's perspective. His conversation with Connor on the rooftops of New York is so eye-opening, and personally, one of my favorite moments of the entire series. He makes Connor and the assassins look so hypocritical and naive that I actually doubted who the villain of this story really is.
Freedom is peace.
Oh no. It's an invitation to chaos. Only look at this little revolution your friends have started. I have stood before the Continental Congress and listened to them stamp and shout. All in the name of liberty. But it is just noise.
And this is why you favor Lee?
He understands the needs of this would-be nation far better than the jobberknolls who profess to represent it.
It seems your tongue has tasted sour grapes. The people have made their choice, and it was Washington.
The people chose nothing. It was done by a group of privileged cowards seeking only to enrich themselves. They convened in private and made a decision that would benefit them. Oh, they might have dressed it up with pretty words. That does not make it true. The only difference, Connor, the only difference between myself and those you aid is that I do not feign affection.
I love the Connor and Haytham dynamic of this story. It's by far one of the most entertaining things to watch. Their constant bickering and quick-witted remarks are not only hilarious, but also very insightful. These two characters are a great duo, and the missions where they work together are some of my favorite in the game. They provide so many comedic moments, but also great insight into the views of the assassins and Templars. I mean, how often do you get to see an assassin and Templar working side by side and actually speak with their words instead of their blades? It doesn't happen often, I'll tell you that much, and it was so well done. Another dynamic I really love in this game is that between Connor and Achilles. They argue and fight in almost every cutscene they're in together, but deep down you know they have a strong bond and respect for one another, like father and son or mentor and apprentice after all those years they spent training. Connor admires Achilles, even though he never really shows it, and it's a fascinating dynamic between the two. There's also a lot of historical figures in this game like Paul Revere, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Samuel Adams, and it puts a big twist on these beloved American heroes. This story reveals that these founding fathers and American icons aren't nearly as perfect or innocent as how they're portrayed in America, especially George Washington. I mean, that man is treated like a saint here, but AC3 really shows this darker side to Washington, and it's a really unique and fresh perspective on such a well-known historical figure. As someone who grew up in America, you never really get to hear the British perspective on the Revolutionary War, and this game allowed me to see that war in a whole new light. Again, carrying on the theme that not everything and everyone is as black and white as it may seem. And I'm sure those of you who grew up in England probably also got some fresh perspective and insight on this as well. Now let's talk about the man this is all about, Connor Kenway. Connor Kenway is a really unique protagonist for this series. He's not at all what we're accustomed to. He doesn't have any charm or lighthearted personality like Ezio or Edward. He's not really after any personal selfish goals like revenge or redemption, although that is part of the reason he hates Charles Lee so much. But Connor is a very serious protagonist. He's a man on a mission. He's very determined and steadfast, and he's not afraid to call people out and argue when they do not agree with him. He's a confrontational character, and he often appears, well, stupid and naive throughout the game, but no matter who tries to persuade him or break his will, he remains strong. Connor sticks sticks to his beliefs and never wavers. He keeps going forward. He's not the kind of character who needs a pep talk or stern hand to guide him. He's ruthless and cutthroat, and he does whatever he can for what he thinks is right. He has great growth throughout the story too, and learns to see the world for its true colors and not just in black and white. He's a multi-layered protagonist, and he never truly got enough credit from the fans. Many people label him as bland, one-dimensional, and a boring protagonist, and I really couldn't disagree more. He may not be the most likable protagonist, but not every person you meet in real life is gonna have that Ezio charm, and Connor just feels like a really real character to me. His story is tragic and even depressing, yet he still moves forward. He was given a task, a mission by the Izu that he didn't even comprehend or understand, and he still fulfilled his role and duty despite all his doubts. He can be a very stubborn and arrogant character, especially when it comes to his hatred for Charles Lee and the Templars, but it's part of the reason that makes him such an interesting character to me. Like I said, he's not the best protagonist by any means, but he deserves far more credit than he often gets, and I really wish they didn't end up deleting his ending monologue, because I think it's a perfect tribute to his character.
Mother, Father, I am sorry. I have failed you both. I made a promise to protect our people. I thought if I could stop the Templars, if I could keep the revolution free from their influence, that those I supported would do what was right. They did, I suppose, do what was right. What was right for them. As for you, Father, I thought I might unite us, that we would forget the past and forge a better future. In time, I believed you could be made to see the world as I did, to understand. But it was just a dream. This too I should have known. Were we not meant to live in peace then? Is that it? Are we born to argue? To fight? So many voices, each demanding something else. It has been hard at times, but never harder than today. To see all I worked for, perverted, discarded, forgotten. You would say I have described the whole of history, Father. Are you smiling then? Hoping I might speak the words you long to hear? To validate you? To say that all along you were right? I will not. Even now, faced as I am with the truth of your cold words, I refuse, because I believe things can still change. I may never succeed. The assassins may struggle another 1,000 years in vain, but we will not stop.
The modern day storyline in Assassin's Creed 3 is definitely my favorite modern day storyline in the series. Up until this point, the modern day was interesting and mysterious, but it was very slowly built. AC3 is finally where everything the series was building towards in the modern day is paid off. The modern day missions are also a lot of fun, gathering the power sources and saving William Miles. I like the contrast between modern day and the past storyline. Most modern days in the previous games have you stay in a room and do a bunch of talking. In AC3, you actually get to go out and fight some Abstergo agents. We finally get to see the results of Desmond's training and the skills he got from Ezio. The ending is a little controversial among fans, but I thought it was a great ending and provided good closure to Desmond Miles. Now what they did after AC3 is where I think they messed up, because the game ended on a bit of a cliffhanger that wasn't properly explained until much later. Usually I'm not too invested in the modern day stuff, but AC3 was one of the few that I really enjoyed. The gameplay in Assassin's Creed 3 is also very unique. This game has one of, if not my favorite combat system of the entire series. It's smooth and responsive, the animations look great, especially the finishers. I love the weapon variety, there's swords, clubs, axes, the tomahawk, the hidden blade and knife, daggers, and there's a noticeable difference in attacks and animations with each weapon. It even has those cinematic multi-kills when multiple enemies attack at once. Stylistically, this combat system looks amazing. amazing. It's also very smooth and easy to learn, maybe a little too easy sometimes, and there's not a lot of enemy variety, but man, this combat system is so much fun. This is probably one of the only Assassin's Creed games where I far prefer combat to stealth. Stealth is really basic in AC3. There's no crouch feature, and the whistling was something new added in the remaster. It's not a terrible stealth system, it still does the job and works, which is more than what I can say for Valhalla's stealth system, but it's definitely not my favorite of the series. It doesn't have a ton of depth, and your tools are pretty limited. There's also just not a lot of stealth opportunities in this game, which is something I never really noticed before when I played this game. Combat is definitely favored in this game, which is completely fine by me honestly, since it's just so good, but stealth is not the first resort like it usually is for me in other AC games, which is not common for me since I largely prefer stealth in most games. Parkour is also a bit weird in this game. The animations themselves look great, but the responsiveness can be off a lot. Connor will often climb and cling to things you don't want him to, and it's very frustrating. Not to mention, all you have to do to climb is hold the sprint button, so you'll often accidentally climb or jump onto things that you don't want to when you're just trying to run around a corner or something like that. Not to mention, the movement can also feel pretty clunky sometimes and hard to control. This game does have tree parkour though, which is actually really fun, but it's severely underutilized in my opinion. It's clear that since Connor is native, they want to use the natural environments and trees to his strength, but there's not a lot of opportunities where tree parkour and hunting and all of that is actually useful. They feel a little tacked on in my opinion, and don't really serve a purpose in a lot of the main story missions. I mean, there's a few times where maybe it'll help to climb trees, but I wish it was a little more encouraged, if that makes sense. This game also has some very outdated mission design, lots of tailing and eavesdropping missions that are just boring and frustratingly slow to play out. Tailing is not a fun gameplay feature, and when you do it 5+ times, you really start to get sick of it, believe it or not. If there's anything I don't miss from the old Assassin's Creed games, it's the tailing missions. There's also a fair amount of naval combat sections in the game. It's pretty much a dumbed down version of Black Flag and Rogue's naval systems, but it was still pretty fun. It felt a little out of place in the game, but they are really short sections, so if you're not a fan of naval combat, you don't have to deal with it for too long, unlike Black Flag and Rogue where it's a major gameplay component. I love the combat in this game, but everything else is very average to me when compared to the rest of the series. Regardless of me being American, I really do enjoy the setting for this game since there aren't many games that take place during the American Revolution in colonial America, or at least not many with the visual capabilities of Assassin's Creed, and I think it was a cool time period and setting to explore for the series. It may not be as beautiful or interesting as Renaissance Italy or Rome, but it was still really fun to see colonial America in video game format. They actually had footage of this game on display at a museum in Washington, D.C. to portray what colonial America looked like. I know because I've been there, because that's how much detail and historical accuracy they created this world with. The cities have great atmosphere and immersion. It's so lively, especially in Boston, bustling with crowds of people and soldiers. The one thing I don't like about this world though is how disconnected everything is. There's New York, Boston, the frontier, and the homestead, and it's kind of a pain to travel between them, and you need to go through multiple loading screens to get to one area from another, which is not only, well, boring, but immersion breaking. I understand why it had to be done in this system, but I personally prefer when the world takes place in one large central location that you can traverse through parkour. There's a lot of open space in AC3, especially in the frontier, which means you spend a lot of time just going from point A to point B. It's a big and beautiful world, but it certainly has its drawbacks. And graphically speaking, I think this game holds up quite well. Obviously, I'm playing the remastered version, which is the only version of the game you can still purchase, and while it's not the greatest remaster and certainly a little lazy, it still has some nice visual improvements over the original game, except for the faces. I don't know why, but somehow the faces got worse in the remaster. Only with Ubisoft, man, I swear. Also, the remaster is still only capped at 60 FPS for some reason, which, I mean, come on. I don't see why we couldn't get unlocked frame rates for the game, but whatever. It's not like 60 FPS is totally unbearable or anything, but it's a little annoying for PC players. Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered isn't the best Assassin's Creed game, or the second best for that matter, or the third. Okay, you get my point. But it's still a really solid and enjoyable game, and in my opinion is heavily underrated by the community. It's definitely worth trying out in 2021 if you haven't played it yet, although it does have some outdated mission design and features, but still a worthwhile experience, I'd say. Despite me saying it's an underrated game, I still really don't know where exactly I would rank it among the series, so I guess you'll have to stay tuned for a ranking video to see that. But let me know what you guys think of Assassin's Creed 3 in the comments, and let me know if you want to see me do a video on the DLC for this game or Liberations as well. And yes, I will do a video on Black Flag eventually, so calm down everyone. I know everybody's going to be asking for that in the comments. They have been for like a year already. I'll get to it, alright? Eventually. But anyway, if you're new here and enjoyed the video, I've made a ton of other game reviews on my channel. I have a whole playlist dedicated to it if you want to check those out. I've also made reviews for AC1 and all the games in the Ezio trilogy, so I'll leave the links for those in the description. I also have a link to my Discord down there as well if you want to join that and talk Assassin's Creed with some people. But other than that, thanks for watching everybody, and have a great day, Assassins.